Hello?
Hello, hi, how you doing?
I'm not too bad, thanks. Sorry
I'm
about
happy
this.
you're here.
I had my computer basically break down yesterday and I had to buy a new one. So it's been a bit challenging.
You are absolutely welcome. Thanks a lot that you take time.
Thank you. Can you hear me now fine? Is it okay?
Yes, I can hear you. I can see you fine. It's absolutely perfect. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I will ask you the interview. Thanks for agreeing to interview. The interview will be for introduction for you. I will ask you, and then we discuss if you agree on your positions, especially about European response to the Iran liberation war, because you became very famous with your tweet about it's not our war, that you criticize the Europeans for standing aside. And all these things are very interesting because we have now the European Council. And this week we will discuss all these things on the European level. And I'm very much supporting the Iran liberation war. And you are perfect. Actually, your statements were wonderful. So I want to provide you this platform. And that's the idea.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Okay. If you agree, I will go and start recording.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Very good. 1, 2, 3, 4. It should start in. Very good. Thanks a lot, everybody. This is Günther Fellinger. We are here at the Voice of the Free World here from Vienna. We are discussing the big issues of our time, and our podcast is developing very good because we have always very interesting guests. Yeah? And today I'm very happy to announce that Kahled Hassan from the United Kingdom is here with us, and he is very active on X. He has over 100,000 followers and is one of the leading voices for freedom in the United Kingdom, and has very clear opinions about what Europe should do now at this decisive moment when the war of liberation is ongoing. The Americans and the Israelis are alone, and the Europeans are again at the sidelines. And we have the European Council Summit, and you became very famous with your tweet yesterday. Kahled, we are very interested in your positions, but please introduce yourself first, because we in the European continent want to know your background, your opinions, and we are very happy that you are here with us to discuss. Kahled, the floor is yours.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. So my name is Kahled Hassan. I'm an Egyptian. I grew up in Egypt, and I'm a researcher. So I focus on national security and foreign policy, specifically focusing on the Middle East. The Middle East has been, everything in my life, basically. And I think I would say, as someone who's Jewish, I am Jewish. I converted to Judaism, and also I am British. And my father-in-law was German, so my children are born to an English mom, British English mom, and they also have German nationality from their granddad. So we're very much part of Europe.
You are really amazing mixture of everything European. I'm so happy. This is quite amazing. Please continue and introduce yourself.
Yes, it's very sad for me, which is why I have the German side of the family, and Germany was known for being pragmatic, reliable, and all that stuff. Especially when it comes to Israel, especially when it comes to taking action where it matters really. And I'm really sad to say that Europe, as you said, has been sidelined by its own leaders. They decided that we are insignificant and irrelevant. And I don't know why they'd made this decision. It doesn't make any sense to me, because I think there are things that are worth fighting for. So I believe that we have to fight for Ukraine, because Russia is engaged in a war of aggression, not only against Ukraine, but against us in the UK. They have sent spies to murder people on British soil. They have sent, the submarines to cause trouble to our own infrastructure. And we have our own military leaders saying this, and our own intelligence leaders saying this. But now you see that, it's fascinating, because Russia uses Iranian drones. So even that reason itself is enough for me, for Europe to actually get involved in liberating Iran. It's a very clear equation here. But for some reason, Europe has decided that they don't fight for values, they don't fight for freedom, They don't fight even for pragmatic reasons. When America says to us, can you send minesweepers to clear the Strait of Hormuz of the mines, so we can open international trade again, which would ease the pressure on us here, because of the prices of oil and all that stuff. And Europe still chooses to be insignificant. So it doesn't make any sense to me, and it's really tragic, and I think Europeans will regret this decision.
Kahled, tell me a bit about why you think this Iran liberation war is justified. What's your moral case for this liberation war?
Well, I mean, if you look at how the Ayatollah's regime in Tehran has acted, it's for a number of reasons. Number one, domestically, they have killed over 30,000 people of their own. A regime that's capable of killing that many of its own in a few days, 30,000 people in a few days, this is a massacre. This is a modern day massacre. And in my view, no one should just watch this and say, sorry, there's not much we can do. Especially now that Americans are asking Europe for only two things: to get involved in, allowing the Americans to use European airspace and bases and, assets, and also getting involved in the clearing of the Strait of Hormuz, which is an internationally significant water passageway. So the war is justified because, in many reasons, as I said, also there is the Russia reason, which is, they are engaged using Iranian drones against us actually, and against our allies. So the question should be, why shouldn't you get involved? I don't see one reason why you shouldn't get involved.
Let's talk first about the United Kingdom, because you're based there in the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom was always with the Americans in the First World War, in the Second World War, in the Cold War, in the liberation war of Bosnia and Kosovo in the 90s, in the questions of Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. The United Kingdom is probably the best ally of the United States ever in history. Now, at this very decisive moment, and the leadership of the United Kingdom, and it seems he has the public backing, is somewhere on the sidelines, and even has been then very lately offering to one aircraft carrier to be sent in the East Mediterranean. And Trump said, so late we don't need it. And when it comes to a very normal thing, which the whole British Empire, the whole British history is built about, that's the freedom of the seas, yeah. And then even in that small request, yeah, and the United Kingdom is missing in action. What's wrong in the United Kingdom today?
There are two things that are wrong with the United Kingdom today. One, we have leaders who have never been personally challenged. So as someone like me who lived in Egypt, who actually faced dictators, who actually, went to protests, believed in something, I found my life at risk on many occasions. And you have to stand for your values. When I look at someone like our prime minister now, he stands for nothing. What's the most challenging point in his life? If you look at Churchill was, in the army, he was an officer in the army. There were many occasions when his life was at risk. This man, has been through challenging times, and challenging times make serious leaders, serious and capable and strong leaders. Our leaders for generations now have been leaders who have achieved nothing in their personal lives, other than business maybe, or, being a bit, controversial, selling a few books, but they stand for nothing. So that's the main challenge. We have a serious issue when it comes to the quality of our leaders today. That's a very, very serious issue. And you will see this, because when they're tested, when they're faced with making a difficult decision, no one makes the decision of let's send a nation to war easily, because you will get body bags. You will get parents that you have to call and say your child died in this war. It's a very difficult decision, but they can't make this decision, even if it's actually in our own benefit. So for me, it feels like you're dealing with a child who refuses to take medicine because that medicine doesn't taste very nice, although it's actually good for them. That's precisely what we're dealing with here. The second issue is we have been captured, this country has been captured by basically foreign influence. Foreign influence, most specifically, it comes from the Muslim vote. We have a very serious issue with the Muslim vote. So, you will see that Prime Minister Keir Starmer in his address during the iftar that they held for Muslims in parliament. He said, oh, we're not involved in the Iran war, and I promise you we're not getting involved in the Iran war. And, the Muslims who were in attendance were clapping for him, and they were applauding, and they were very pleased with him. This is what he's trying to do. He's trying to win the Muslim vote by saying, look, I'm not fighting for Israel. I'm not fighting with America. I'm not fighting a Muslim country, basically. So that's what he's hoping for. And again, we're going to pay a very serious price for this.
But in Austria, for example, I'm very much involved in the Iranian protests here for free Iran. And these are also Muslims. Most of the people in Iran are obviously Muslims. And so they are calling for assistance. They want their country to be free. And they are calling for American and Israeli intervention the whole time since the January massacre. Is it not the same as well in the United Kingdom, that the Iranians really want this intervention?
There is actually a big difference when it comes to Iran and other Muslim countries. Because Iran, if you look at it, it does not accept political Islam. It does not accept, this Arabization of Iran. When Iran was basically occupied by the Ayatollah's regime, because that's what happened. They went over and they started their own militias to basically suppress everyone, no political opposition. You'll find that the Iranians have their own Iranian values. They like their language. They don't really strongly associate with the Palestinians. They don't associate with Pan-Arabism and Nasser and all that stuff. So even the Muslims from Iran, who actually, we're seeing studies now saying that most Iranians are not really Muslim like other Muslim countries. They're more secular. They're more, not less involved in political Islam. So that's one aspect. But the other aspect is, even Muslim countries are being attacked now by Iran. The problem we have in the UK is that we have a very extremist version of, what a Muslim community does. We have a really serious issue because even Saudi Arabia, even the UAE, you would not find that strong support, this as we have here in the UK from the Muslim community. And it's fascinating. I can't think, we've allowed the most extremist voices in Britain's Muslim community to be the mainstream of the Muslim community here in Britain.
And that's a very dangerous development. You basically say that the Labour Party's governance is hijacked by an extreme form of Islamist ideology.
Yes, exactly. That's precisely the point. And you've seen this. We've seen this from a whistleblower last week, someone who's actually almost an ambassador level in the Foreign Office in Britain. He said this explicitly. He said, our foreign policy now is hijacked by Islamists.
That's a disaster for the United Kingdom and also for everybody in the world. Yeah, very worrying development in the UK. Let me ask you now about your opinions about the European Union, because we had big hopes in Chancellor Merz. He was in the 12-day wars last year. He was calling, applauding basically Israel and the United States for doing he called it dirty work to punish the Iranian terror regime for the aggression and also for the nuclear project. And in the beginning of 2026, he was also very much in favor of regime change. But seemingly he has shifted his position now. And what's your expectation of today's EU Council meeting? Do you think that Europe will swing in line for liberation of Iran? Or do you think we are all ever more drifting away from that and we are ever moving more to irrelevance?
I think we are moving into irrelevance, sadly, because if you look at Germany, Chancellor Merz was he had a very, very valid point, actually. He said that, you cannot talk to me about international law, basically, when it comes to this war, when you have the Ayatollah's regime who do not comply with international law in any way, shape, or form. So it's almost like you're tying my hand. You're telling me you cannot attack them because it's against international law, but they don't respect international law. So it's a very, unfair position to be in. And I really admired him for making this point because it's a very valid point. But I think there is a serious issue in Europe where you see Keir Starmer going one way, and alongside him, the French are also doing, something similar. So that leaves Germany, almost, having to do this on its own, not within Europe. And that creates a problem. So obviously, it's with the weight of, the economic cost of the war, it will be very difficult, I think, for the Germans to say, okay, we're breaking away from the British and the French, and we're going to get involved with the Americans and the Israelis. And again, you're going to have foreign influence increasing. You're going to have, the Muslim vote, again, the Islamist vote increasing in Europe. And that will make it very hard for many European countries, actually, if not most European countries, to take action that is even good for them when they have to.
Kahled, let me ask you about the Spanish Prime Minister. He has a very difficult, complicated role in this whole game. He is also the president of the Socialist International, and he is somehow the cheerleader of the appeasers, of the pacifists, and of the irrelevance he calls himself the head of the peace camp, but in reality, he has done very little for Ukraine, and he is now doing nothing for the freedom of Iran. He's a very deeply problematic figure. What is your opinion about him?
I think he's actually one of the most dangerous men in Europe in many, many years. If you look at what he's done, so I was involved in a case where my research, working with the the previous UK government, we managed to deport one of the most prominent Muslim Brotherhood figures from the UK. And after this man was deported from the UK, he went to Spain. Mm-hmm. So I wrote to a few contacts in Spain, diplomatic and security contacts, and they said, you now have a terrorist in Spain. Can you do something about this? And I never received a response. No one even cares. Mm-hmm. So Spain is in a position now where it is, I believe, welcoming terrorists under this man's leadership. I really despise him, I have to admit. And he's also, the whole sort of regularization of almost 500,000 illegal immigrants who are now going to be almost fast-tracked into citizenship in Spain. What does this do to a country? This is suicide, because you're not only saying, if you come here illegally, we're going to give you legal status and citizenship, but you're also going to be part of Europe. You're also going to be able to travel freely. Once you have a Spanish passport, you're going to be able to travel, move to the UK, go elsewhere. And he's doing things because I think he's extremely dogmatic. I actually believe he's an extremist, to be honest, everything that he's doing. And I think he is one of the clearest indications of where Europe is heading.
Today we have the European Council the coming 2 days, and decisions will be made, but it seems to be that Europeans are no longer so interested in the human rights of Iran or the export of Islamist terror, but they're only interested in the oil price. Yeah? It's like a persiflage of the world, because prior to it was always our position that we are the defenders of global human rights, and it's the Americans who are waging war for oil. That is the perception of many of the leftovers in history of our difference with America. But now the Americans are doing a humanitarian intervention, basically, as a response to the 8th of January. They are waging this war and helping the Iranians to find freedom at huge cost, while the Europeans are only crying for cheaper oil. Is that not very regrettable?
It is. It's actually, it's tragic, because when you look at not only, this aspect, but you look at how Europe has been funding dictators for a very long time now. We used to have Europe that would say to dictators in the Middle East, you're not going to get funding from Europe if you continue to suppress your political opposition. Now Europe doesn't care about this. And I don't want to name specific leaders in the Middle East, but we're talking about very dangerous leaders who put their own people in prison just for expressing a political view. And we see European leaders not only shaking hands with them, but actually giving them money. Because Europeans now are terrified of the concept of, well, what would happen if this, dictatorship collapses? Then we might get some refugees from this country. So, we'd rather actually keep this dictator in place. But what that means is you're not still, actually securing your borders. That's one aspect, because you still will get refugees from these dictatorships. And the other thing is, you are being taken hostage. You're being blackmailed by those dictators who tell you, if you try anything against me, I'm just going to let people engage in illegal immigration, and that's going to cause you issues. So they're blackmailing Europe, and Europe is doing nothing. We're just playing along, basically.
But there is also the president of Finland, Mr. Stubb, who has made some proposal to the American president now on his visit, and that we should build a coalition with America and Europe help America and Israel to liberate Iran, while America should help Europe to kick Russia out of Crimea and Ukraine. What's your opinion about this proposal?
I think that's a very fair, suggestion. It's a very reasonable suggestion. And that's what I said in my tweet. I said, look, if you say the Iran war is not my war, the Americans can say, well, the Ukraine war is not my war. It's thousands of miles away from me. Why should I get involved? And people don't really understand this. But mostly, I think that's because we have a fundamental issue here that's really concerning. Our society is controlled by left-wing extremists mainly. We have seen the BBC doctoring and manipulating footage for President Trump, and then they apologized about this. And that's an issue that is actually widespread. It's commonplace because we believe, no one, for example, would credit President Trump for actually saying to NATO that you need to invest more. Every country needs to invest more in NATO. No one gives him the credit for this. And everyone just blames him and saying, you're going to break up NATO and all that stuff. So I think we need a balanced view that says the transatlantic alliance between Europe and America is absolutely crucial for our survival. It's not just, it's our security and survival.
What's going wrong in the BBC? Because in Austria, we have also some Austrian-style BBC, publicly funded TV, and they are basically allowing themselves to be turned into the spokesperson of the Ayatollah regime or basically of the Russian government. It's unbelievable, dominated by left-wing, unilateral kind of perspectives, and you really wonder in what reality they live. Is it as bad as in Austria, as well in the BBC in the UK?
I think actually the BBC started this in a way, because if you look at Canada, you're going to see, the equivalent of the BBC almost doing the same thing. If you look at across Europe, you're going to find in Sweden, there is the same issue. Everywhere there is almost an equivalent of the BBC. But the BBC is so influential, and it was one of the very first platforms to, sort of mainstream this very leftist view. And you'll find that they make arguments that are unreasonable, irrational, but because they hold so much power, no one who makes a counter argument is even allowed to actually air these counter arguments. So you're going to find that, if you look at the BBC, for example, I was involved in the most comprehensive report ever written about the BBC. And this, we looked at BBC Arabic. You're going to find, for example, that BBC Arabic, the overwhelming majority of Palestinians from Gaza that BBC Arabic platformed were actually linked to terrorist groups. So BBC Arabic would tell you, we now have this guy from Gaza, he's a doctor, or he's a lawyer, or he's an activist. But once you actually dig a little deeper on him, you find out that he's officially part of Hamas, or his family are part of Hamas, which obviously means he's not, impartial. So we are facing a serious disaster because they shape public opinion.
According to these public TVs, the war in Iran is going very bad, and Trump has no strategy. Netanyahu doesn't know what he's doing, and we are going into a full disaster in Iran. What's your opinion, actually? What's your perspective? We have now, since 28th of February, this liberation war. What's your perspective? How much objectives have been achieved? How stable is the Iranian terrorist regime still? And how long will this war continue until the regime will be changed?
I think this is one of the most impressive wars I have ever seen. I think this is one of the most impressive wars in history. If you look at how many fighter jets, if you look at how many people were involved from the Israeli side and the American side, and you look at the casualties on the American side, so far we know of almost 7 people who have been killed, 7 servicemen and women on the American side. You're talking about thousands. You're talking about the entire regime in Tehran eliminated within the first couple of hours. That's unprecedented. We're talking about miracles. This is, that we actually hear in Europe, people saying you don't have a strategy. Do you think if they did not have a strategy, if they did not have very solid intelligence, they would have been able to kill the entire regime in the very first couple of hours? The problem is, you then talk to people like Keir Starmer, who said, it doesn't seem like America has a strategy. Well, what is his strategy in Ukraine? I am very in favor of supporting Ukraine, but all we have been doing is send Ukraine money and watch the war go on and on and on. They say the Americans don't have an exit strategy for the war in Iran. Well, what is Europe's exit strategy for the war in Ukraine? What's the exit strategy? When does this war end? Because, we see people asking, when does the Iran war end? Well, when does the Ukraine war end?
It's 4 years and ongoing, and the British have made a coalition of the willing that in case the war is over, they will secure the peace, which is an extremely generous and courageous offer. After they have the war is over, then the British will come. I really cannot understand this irony of the British position and the European position, because logically would be to really help now to win the war and to drive the Russians out of Crimea. That would be the courageous and normal position which European powers should have at this tragedy of the Russian invasion against Ukraine.
Yes, it's...
Please, yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, just you want to, we can continue shortly for Ukraine, but if I have you already on this interview, I would like to see a little bit also discuss some specific Arab governments, if that's interesting for you. But I want to thank you very much for your support for Ukraine. But if we can, because you are very knowledgeable, I would like to ask you also about Egypt, because you are from Egypt and you were protesting in the times of the revolution, I understand. And now we have a military dictatorship, but Egypt is trying to join BRICS, or is a bit aligned to BRICS. And I'm not so happy because we are funding Egypt with many, many millions, billions actually. And the policy result is not so really fantastic. What's your opinion?
Yes. The challenge is, and this is actually an American failure before it was a European failure, to be very honest. Because the Americans have been giving Egypt a lot of money, because they're quite afraid of Egypt collapsing, because, it's 120 million people. So it's a very big country. And also because Egypt is the cornerstone of Arab-Israeli peace, because Egypt was the first country to have a peace treaty with Israel. So when you look at this, you see that they have been allowing Egypt to get away with many things, including getting close to China. Egypt was the very first country to actually have military drills with the Chinese army in North Africa. They invited them to come to North Africa. Despite the very serious concerns about intelligence, they were collecting intelligence from American military in the Middle East. This was a very serious issue. But again, I believe that the Egyptian government is actually being very clever. They blackmail the Europeans, they blackmail the Americans, and because we are so scared and terrified of any confrontation, we're not doing much. We're not saying, hold on a moment, you can't do this, otherwise you're not going to get any money from us. We don't really do this. We try to, work around it, we try to talk to them, we try to do all that stuff, and it's not working. It's just not working. The problem, I believe, in the Middle East is, again, Europeans have been extremely apologetic about having any influence in the Middle East because they believe, you now have the whole concept about colonization and all that stuff. And that's why Europe is withdrawing from the Middle East. They don't want to be accused of colonization or of, starting wars or whatever. But what that means is that we end up enabling dictators in the Middle East.
That was my question about the various governments in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait. We have liberated Kuwait in 91. We are generally, I see Saudi Arabia as a key ally of the West and of Europe and of America. But, they have been not so forthcoming in the last decade in terms of policy. Now there is a deliberation war, and they are getting hit actually by Iran. What's the perception in these countries? Do they want to be more friendly to us in the future, or do they really see that we are basically trying to help, especially the Americans? What's the public opinion, and what is your perception on the leadership of the Arab states in the Gulf now during the War of Liberation?
I want to be very honest and say that pretty much the only country that I fully trust is the UAE.
Okay.
The UAE is very serious. It has serious values. So when the UAE made its peace with Israel, they actually want peace. They actually want friendship. They want tolerance. They want, to see Muslims and Jews actually engaging together and working together. That's very serious. This needs to be said. Other countries have been playing games with us. Let's put it this way. So the Saudis, they have been playing games with us, and they don't really have a very clear strategy. They try to manipulate us, and they almost succeed most of the time with doing this. But they have almost every other country. I think this is the very core of the issue. They don't believe in the values we believe, but they try to deal with us in a transactional way. Like, I'm going to give you money, you're going to sell me some planes and fighter jets and whatever, and everyone is going to be happy with this. That's not good enough. It just isn't good enough, because they end up, again, like I said, playing us against the Chinese. So if America says, no, we're not going to give you, the fighter jets that you want unless you normalize relations with Israel, then the Saudis say, okay, we're going to go to the Chinese. So that's fundamentally the main issue. I think Europe needs to have a clear strategy, and America needs to have a clear strategy, and these strategies need to be based on our Judeo-Christian, humanitarian, human rights, and all of the European values we appreciate.
What do you think about the role of Qatar?
I think Qatar is actually portrayed as something that is far more dangerous than it actually is. I don't think Qatar is as dangerous as Turkey, for example. Qatar is still dangerous because it has a very, very effective propaganda machine. It has a very Islamist propaganda machine. But again, I think Qatar is much easier to deal with than Turkey, than Egypt, than others in the region. So my focus should be on the countries that really represent, a clear threat to the European and Western way of life. And after this, I think Qatar is actually quite reasonable, when it comes to dealing with the Qataris. They're far more reasonable. And this is something that a lot of people don't see. Yes, you see, Al Jazeera and all that stuff. But even if you look at Al Jazeera, you're going to find that the people who run Al Jazeera are mostly Egyptian. So the people who make the programs and all that stuff, they're mostly Egyptian, because Egyptians have been very effective. And, they're the first ones to start, news and media and propaganda machines across the Arab world.
When it comes to the European Union, our most effective foreign policy tools is not militarily, but it's our free trade agreements. And since decades, we are negotiating with the Gulf Cooperation Council to conclude a free trade agreement. We should have concluded it many years ago, but it's still not done, unfortunately. Do you think it is a good idea? Do you think that the Gulf is a potential, this Gulf Cooperation Council is a potential good ally for the European Union, a trade partner, and also a strategic partner in the future?
Yes, I think they are. Generally, overall, I think it's good for Europeans. It's good for, the people of Austria, the people of France, Germany. It is actually good for us. It's good for us economically. It's good for us because we also need to have influence. So when you have a trade agreement, you have influence over the GCC, and you can actually get involved in building a serious and reliable alliance. And I think, again, in my view, we have to support the UAE, because the UAE is really leading all the efforts against extremism, against terrorism in the Middle East. So yes, absolutely. I think we should strengthen this alliance.
Kahled, I'm a long-term critic towards OPEC, which is the organization based in Vienna. And I always say that it should leave Vienna because it's a cartel and it manipulates the prices. And especially since they have turned into this OPEC Plus, That means basically to have an alliance with Russia, Saudi Arabian, Russian alliance and the oil markets. Yeah, I really don't like that at all. What's your opinion? Can we not come to an understanding that this OPEC way of manipulating the global oil markets on behalf of Saudi Arabia and Russia is really very bad for the West? And as a part of a realignment of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries to at least reduce or basically end the influence of Russia in OPEC, or even dismantle OPEC and have a real economic partnership with the Gulf countries on a level which is serious, on a level of equality and not mutual blackmailing?
Well, it's actually very interesting because when you look at this, I think it's very comparable to, let's say you have milk in your house, you've got a few pints of milk, but you decide that milk is not good for the environment. So you take the milk that you have in your house and you throw it away, and then you go out and try to buy milk from someone else. So don't complain when the person who's selling you the milk sets the price. In the UK, we have decided, no, because of net zero, we're not going to, do any drilling in the North Sea. We're not going to get involved. We're not looking at our own resources. We're not trying to have our own resources. So we obviously leave ourselves quite vulnerable to, Saudi Arabia, which is mostly, the country that actually sets the price. And then we blame them. I think this is very irrational, if you ask me. Obviously, they want to make as much money as they can. This is the free market. It's how things work. If you want to fight this, you know what? Let's fight it. Let's actually invest in our own resources. When we do this, we'll be able to set our own terms. We'll be able to say, hold on a moment, which is also, by the way, a very critical issue in the Iran war, because Iran has a lot of oil that goes to China and goes to Russia. Well, to China mainly. If we can free Iran and Iran can be a partner of Europe, why can't we get our oil from Iran?
Absolutely.
This is another reason why the Iran war is very crucial. A free Iran that is pro the West, pro Israel, is going to be hugely influential in setting the price of oil globally.
This leads directly to the Strait of Hormuz back. You think that the Americans and Europeans should have a joint naval expedition to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is free?
100%. Look, when Nasser of Egypt tried to block Israel's access in 1956, for in the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, France, Britain, and Israel went to war because you don't block, one of the key routes for international trade. You just don't. This means you are harming the average European. I am paying more for petrol now in the UK. So I want my government to do something about this. So we 100% have to, because also it's part of our international order. If anyone can do whatever they want, if Iran can close the Strait of Hormuz, if Egypt can close the Suez Canal, then that leaves us, our own people, hostage, being blackmailed by tyrants and dictators.
What's your opinion about this strike on Karg Island, which happened a week ago, where the Americans have destroyed the military appliances and bases of Iran's regime on this vital oil terminal, which is called Karg Island? What's your opinion on that one? And what should be the next steps in relation to Karg Island?
I think this was strategically significant. And I think the Americans and the Israelis have a very, very clear, detailed plan for how to weaken this regime and basically pave the way for the Iranians to take to the streets and liberate their own country. So one of the main issues I have with this war is that we get a lot of people who don't know these details, because obviously this is a war, these are national security secrets. And they tell you, this war is not going well. There are things you and I and others will never know because these are military secrets. But everything we see indicates that it's going very well. I believe we should continue to weaken the regime. That also means striking their economic centers, the places where they make money, whether it's oil resources or whatever it is. We just have to do this to be able to weaken the regime. Because once the regime cannot pay the salaries for its terrorists, once the regime cannot pay Hezbollah, once they cannot pay the Houthis, then this regime truly and its proxies across the region will collapse. So my point is just trust the process, trust the Americans, trust the Israelis, they know what they're doing.
There's an expeditionary ship of 2,200 US Marines on the road to the Persian Gulf. Would you agree and counsel towards whatever a kind of liberation of US ground troops, also naval troops, the Marines, for example, to control the Karg Island or the Chesem Island and to have the access of the straits and the oil terminal to be also under physical control of the US Army?
Yes, I believe this is necessary for us because I believe it actually weakens China, it weakens Russia. It means that pretty much the only country that is leading the war on behalf of the free world is liberating this part of the world, which means, we're all going to be better off. The Middle East will be better off. The US will be better off because once you control this, crucial central part, we're just stronger. The West is actually stronger. So if the Americans are only doing it and no one else wants to get involved, the Europeans don't want to get involved, I think it's completely fair for the Americans to do whatever they want. Control it, access it, as long as they're being fair and reasonable.
We also have in Germany and Italy still American bases like Ramstein and Aviano since 80 years ago, since the liberation of Europe from the Nazis. And so it's also legitimate, I think, for the Americans to have naval bases in the Persian Gulf after they have liberated Iran. I think it's the European president is logically here. Let's talk for post-war Iran in terms of the role of Reza Pahlavi. He is the crystallizing figure, the former crown prince of Iran, who lived his whole life in the United States. And he is now absolutely celebrated figure by many Iranians who live in America and Europe. And what do you think is his status and his role when it comes to the liberation of Iran? And can he be the king of Iran, the president of an interim administration, or should we Europeans and Americans recognize him as the head of an exile government? What are the various policy options you see, and what would you recommend?
I think he is actually the most realistic alternative to the Ayatollah's regime because there is precedence. So, we know that, his father was actually ruling Iran before all that happened. His rule was not perfect. We obviously know this, but it's almost the same as Egypt. We had the king in Egypt before Nasser. And when the king was going to be toppled by Nasser and the military in Egypt, the king actually sent messages to the Americans and to the British and said, I need help. I'm being basically ousted from my post. And the Americans and the British did nothing. So Egypt turned into what it is today, which is not helpful to us. It's not helpful to our interests. And it's the same thing in Iran. The Europeans actually helped the Ayatollah's regime, build this regime, sadly. And I think the key issue is a peaceful transition of power in Iran. So, we don't want Iran to, go into civil war or conflict internally after the Ayatollah's regime collapses. What we want is a clear alternative that takes Iran into, makes it a beautiful country that is pro the West, that is pro freedom. And I think this man is very capable of being, at least a symbol of this. So we should support him, I believe. Yes.
Kahled, Iran is a very diverse country with a lot of minorities. Now everybody knows about the Kurds, but there are also the Baluch, the Turkmens, the Azeris, and many other minorities in this huge country of 93 million. And we have in the United States and in Germany, we have this, because Germany was built after the model of the United States after the liberation in 45, we have so-called federalism. I have proposed a federal free Iran, but then everybody got a very big excited on Twitter against me because, I don't know, it's a bit complex topic. But in Germany and in Spain and in many other countries, we have also diverse countries and we made good results with federalism. And that's why the United States is maybe the best example in the world of a constitution which is based on 50 states united. So the question would be if that's not a role model for Iran to look in order to deal with the diversity and still have unity. What's your take on the minorities, the role of the Kurds, the Baluchs? What's your level of information? What you would like to recommend to everybody who is watching here to do at the moment?
I think, to be honest, this is unprecedented. What we're seeing with Iran today, freeing Iran like this is, we have a lot of questions. We don't know whether federalism would work or not. It's definitely a valid suggestion. It makes sense, I think. But we don't know how the people would feel about it, domestically. That's the main problem because, the Ayatollah's regime suppressed every minority, and we don't really have a lot of interactions to see, what would work or what wouldn't work. So I think in the initial stage, have this interim government, and basically they should decide. I think they should decide. This is my view. They should decide what happens. I think we should be very, very careful of separatist movements. So some movements will want to basically break up Iran to smaller states. I think that would be very problematic because it would actually indicate and feed into the conspiracy theory that a lot of anti-Semites have, that Israel and America want to break up, Muslim countries into smaller countries that don't have armies, don't have, influence. So I think we should be very careful about this. But federalism is definitely a choice that I think needs to be considered. Whatever it is, we're going to have to basically build something pretty much, not from scratch, thankfully, because we have, the model of the Shah before the Ayatollah's regime. And that's why Reza Pahlavi is very crucial in this stage, I think.
Khaled, many expect now that Reza Pahlavi will very soon call for revolution after the regime's infrastructure of terror is sufficiently degraded. Do you expect that to happen? Do you expect it to work? And do you expect that the people who sadly don't have many weapons in Iran, they will be massacred, or that they will be successful in overturning the institutions and imposing freedom on the Iranians?
I actually said months ago that I believe that he will be seen in Tehran himself. Once it's actually safe enough to send Reza Pahlavi into Tehran, where he will be physically present, that will be the moment that I think will really change the dynamic of the war. Because once he's present in Tehran, the people, the army, and everyone else can rally behind him and start building the new Iran. And I think, yes, it is definitely going to happen. I think at some point he's going to call for a revolution. At some point he's going to be present in Tehran to actually get this done seriously. It could get nasty because, there are still people who are affiliated with the Ayatollah's regime who are going to, cause trouble. But I think the people of Iran will have a very beautiful moment when they actually see this happening. And I think it's going to be, overwhelmingly pro Reza Pahlavi, to be honest.
Khaled, now it's about close to 3 o'clock, and the European Council leaders, all the leaders, Mr. Sanchez, who you don't like, Mr. Merz, who you like, and Mrs. Meloni, Mr. Macron, Mr. Stocker from Austria, and all the leaders of Poland, Mr. Tusk, and they're all now assembling in the Council building in Brussels, and they will make decisions. They will discuss it, and they will make decisions. What's your call? What should the European leaders do at this moment in the terms of Ukraine, Iran? What should be the rational and the reasonable position of the European Union right now?
I think it should be very clearly an unequivocal support for the US, unequivocal support for Israel, unequivocal support for the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf, who have been hit by Iran. And they should make it perfectly clear that if the Ayatollah's regime do not cease their operations in the Strait of Hormuz and open it up, that Europe should get involved directly in the effort to actually open the strait. It's very simple. It's not complicated. This should be, 2 paragraphs. This is what we say should be done, and this is what we're going to do to make sure it's actually done.
I hope Mrs. Callas has seen our interview now. Kahled, I want to thank you very much. I will share it widely on X and in all the social medias and publish it as a podcast. And I want to thank you very much for your clarity, for your brave statements, and also for your leadership in the public space for freedom for the Iranians and for the support of Ukraine. We need more leaders like you, Khaled. Thanks a lot that you came on this show.
Thank you very much for your time, and likewise, I'd like to thank you. It's very rare to have someone in Europe now with your clarity and your leadership. So it's been a pleasure, and I really do hope that Europeans will listen to you, because this is a moment where we need a voice like yours to lead from the front. And I really, really believe we're needed in the Middle East. We should not be withdrawing. We should not be isolationist. We should get more involved and show actual courage in freeing the people of Iran.
This is the moral mission which Europe has. This is what we shall do, and this is our clarity. I think we have learned it. We were also liberated in the Second World War, not by nice talking, but by American military intervention, which was called World War II, and it was the right thing to do. And thanks to America for liberating us. And the Iranians will say one day the same.
Absolutely.
Kahled, thanks a lot. All the best. Thanks for coming to this interview.
Thank you.
It was very nice. I will send you the link in the coming moments, and let's stay in touch and let's work together.
Yes, sounds great. I'll leave it open because I think it needs to upload.
Yeah, so I just leave it works automatically. Just don't close the computer because it will be uploaded in some moments.
Okay, sounds brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Speak soon.
Speak soon. Bye.
Bye.
In the United Kingdom, and has very clear opinions about what Europe should do now at this decisive moment. Ja, das schauen wir ja. Das wird aber ja hingehen.